Here's the drawing of the French Cathedral in Berlin, which we're going to do by using the from the inside out method. This isn't as common or taught as often as the outside in method, where we rough out the larger shapes, try and work them into proportion, and then we add the detail after that. Roughing out the large shapes first can work well when drawing with pencil, but because I draw with pen and every line is going to be there at the end, it doesn't work so well for me because I find it's much easier to get the parts of my building in proportion and in scale with each other, a much easier process drawing this way. So what I do is I find the easiest part of the scene to draw accurately, usually where fundamentally there are some simple shapes. Now, in this cathedral, the facade we're looking at, the left-hand side I thought was the clearest run of basically box shapes, because for me, probably for most people, that seems to be the easiest way to do it. Now, I'm drawing the columns and I'm drawing the spaces between the columns, and you'll see that straight away I add the detail of the windows, because this is my double check that the shapes I've got, the spaces I've got between the columns are the right proportions, because if they're the right proportions, I'll be able to draw the detail correctly and have it look the way the detail looks. Square windows will be square, long rectangular windows will be long and rectangular, as it is in the reference. And that's a great thing to find out with this very early stage, because this first thing we draw is the most important thing that we draw, because it becomes our ruler, it becomes our reference when we're working out where to add the new parts to our drawing. And you'll notice I moved across, but I didn't do the detail, I didn't finish it as much, because there's a memorial that covers a good part of that facade. I also, even on the left-hand side, didn't go down to the bottom of that section because there's a figure that blocks that. So paying attention to our reference, or to what we're going to want to draw, so that we reserve paper, is very important, but it's a fairly fundamental part of drawing from the inside out. And you'll notice I've also put the hatching for the colour of that door and the shading of that entrance area, because that helps me get a sense of, are the proportions correct, is the overall balance right? And if I didn't do that, it wouldn't be as obvious. I put a dot where I think the top of the pediment's going to be, and you saw me with the pen measure the angle and just check whether that pediment was going to create the right angle. Also paying attention to the fact that the sides, the ends of each of the sides of the pediment, don't sit on the entablature, they're lifted up, they're raised up a section. And you can see what I'm doing now. I'm simply now, from my starting point moving outwards, adding more detail, making sure that I align with what I've already drawn. So I'm looking to see in the reference what's underneath the things I'm drawing at that moment. And then I find that point on my drawing and align whatever I'm drawing with that. When I drew those figures, you might have noticed that I started with the heads. I find that's the easiest way to get the sculptural figures that we so often find on neoclassical buildings correctly proportioned. If we start from the shoulders down or the feet up, it's so often very easy to draw them too large. If I put a dot where I want the head to be, that lets me work really hard at keeping the figure thin enough, keeping my lines close enough together. And I'm not trying to draw a figure, I'm really trying to capture the silhouette at this point, at this distance with these figures. So I try and simply see it as a shape to reproduce. And then there are the seated figures on each side. And we've started now to draw the base of the drum that the dome eventually sits on. It's a multi-leveled drum. And I'm also aware as I draw this that because we're looking upwards, the way the perspective is working is that each of these curves will become slightly more curved as it moves up the drum and up the dome. And now I have to do positioning of the top of the colonnaded section of the drum. And I'm aligning where the sides, the columns on each side of the drum can be seen with what's underneath it in the reference, and again transferring that to my drawing now. And what I tend to do is not align it with the part directly underneath, but align it with the original part I started to draw. That stops a slight creep of inaccuracy happening. If I keep going back to the original starting reference point, every time I align things that are above that or to the sides of that, I keep tight the margin of error. Now, I've probably pushed that colonnaded section just slightly too high up. I think it should be maybe, 3 or 4 or 5 millimeters, a bit shorter. It's always good to consider, how have I done this, to critique what we've done, because it lets us work out what we're going to do next time. Tells us a spot to perhaps pay attention with a little more accuracy, a little more detail. Now I'm adding the details between the columns because, again, I want to see, check whether in fact they fit and the proportions are accurate enough. And so now, again, still moving upwards. Now I'm going to go right up and draw the top of the dome before I come down and draw the sides and the base area. And while drawing this way can be very slow at the start, because we really have to pay attention that our initial starting point is accurate. So there's lots of looking back and forth intently. As the building progresses, we become more aware of the scale and the proportions that we're drawing. But there's also more drawing to reference from as well. And so we can work out accurate alignments faster and more confidently. And so the drawing tempo does pick up. This drawing took me 45 minutes to do in real-time drawing. If you want, you can use the cog icon to slow it down to half this speed, which will make it not that much faster than my actual drawing speed. With everything, though, I need to keep looking at the reference, not to think that I've remembered from when I looked drawing a different part and I can just carry the memory of what was around it. For every new thing I draw, I need to have a new observational moment where my focus is completely on that item, because I can't erase anything. So if things aren't quite right, I want them to be not quite right in a small way so that they're either not too noticeable or I can overcome them in some way. Now, I'm creating the effect of detail with this, whether it's these architectural little teeth that sit underneath ledges in classical architecture, whether it's the balustrades. I work hard to draw not the detail, but something that comes across as the detail at the scale of the detail as well. Now I've moved on to this memorial, and I need to draw it before I can complete the front, or this side facade it is in fact, of the cathedral. I'm doing the same thing with the figure here. I establish the head in relation to the base according to my reference first, and then I work out where that is. And I see the reference as a series of shapes that step downwards. We've got the figure, we've got the pedestal, we've got wrought iron balustrade railing. And so I'm basically stepping down each layer, doing my best to keep it in proportion and to keep it aligned vertically and horizontally with the things I've already done. So having worked at where that memorial is, I can now finish the base of the church as long as I put these distant figures in first. And I've then got the main figure, the closest figure to do. And again, I'm going to align it with what I've already done. So I know the head is just basically breaking into that base foundational part of the church. And then I can also measure to see where the lower half of the figure aligns with the base of the railing around the memorial on the right. And so all the time I'm firstly finding these reference points on my reference, and then I'm finding where they are on my drawing. And I often put little dots and marks and just visualize is this going to look right? Because sometimes if I've made a mistake before this, I need to adjust the accuracy of what I draw, split the difference of an error perhaps, so that it's not as obvious. Now with this railing, it's another good example I think of capturing the effect of detail, not actually drawing the detail. I'm not just oversimplifying it and putting vertical bars there, and I want to capture something of this particular pattern because that helps to carry the feel of the place. And yet I don't want, and I also have to relate that pattern in foreshortening as it steps around the corner, so to speak. So all the time it's getting the feel without having to draw the detail. Because there's so much detail, our eyes really will take in all the detail at once, or a lot of it at once, and we don't have to be precise with any one point because of that. People often remark that they're amazed at the detail in my drawing. They're even more amazed when they zoom to looking closely at the detail and they find it's not there. I think that comment is a wonderful demonstration of what this technique is trying to achieve, of drawing the effect of detail. I really came to focus on it drawing trees first, where instead of trying to draw the detail of the leaves, I try to draw the effect of all of the leaves at once. But it really works for any subject of overwhelming detail. There is a way to draw it that does not require detailed accuracy, which often ends up looking overdrawn because it ends up giving that detail more visual oomph than it actually has in life. And so another good reason to practice capturing the effect of detail, I have a playlist on capturing the effect of detail if you're interested, and here I use it again to capture the effect of these pediment figures, this relief of figures sculpted into the face of the pediment. And if you look to see, if you maybe zoom in on this, you'll see I'm trying to draw shapes that look like figures, that look like real figures in real poses, but really suggest it rather than capture it accurately, because we shouldn't be looking at any one figure really. We're going to see the whole thing. We're going to see it in a pediment, and so the context will be pushing our brain to see this as figures. So we don't need to do all that detail. And now some hatching for the colour of the dome at the top. My statue's a little bit too large. I began to have problems with my 0.3mm pen, just getting lines fine enough for some of the small detail. I really should have switched to a finer pen for some of those things. Now we've just got really some of these side parts. Again, I'm trying to draw with a very light touch so this feels like it's set back. But same principle, I'm still moving from the inside out. I'm establishing a shape I can draw accurately against the shapes I've already drawn. And then I'm adding the detail and then moving outwards. And even if you're drawing pencil and can use an eraser at any stage, if you have trouble getting proportions correct, if drawing the large shapes, trying to rough them out and then adding the detail means that the proportions just aren't right and you can't fit everything in, or there's too much gap around the things, then why not try, instead of working from the outside in, working from the inside out, and see if that's not a way of greater accuracy for you. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Hope you found this interesting. I've repurposed this drawing from a video a few years ago to be able to focus on this idea of drawing from the inside out rather than the outside in, as a way possibly of greater accuracy. It's certainly worked that way for me. But look, in the end, whatever way you use, however it turns out for you, make sure you have fun. Bye.